What makes a movie feel real? When making fantasy movies, making the world the movie is set in believable can be a hard task. And our favorite fantasy movies often are the most believable ones. It should come as no surprise, then, that the Lord of the Rings trilogy won 17 Academy Awards and has overwhelmingly positive reviews. The trilogy was directed by Peter Jackson in the early 2000s, adapting a book made over 5 decades prior and bringing the world of Middle-earth to the big screen. Through the usage of non-diegetic sound, specific usage of lighting, and clear visual themes, Peter Jackson and his crew created a fantasy world which not only looks but also feels real. As film critic Lisa Schwarzenbaum put it, Lord of the Rings is vibrantly, intricately alive on its own terms. This is what magic the movies can conjure with an inspired fellowship in charge and unlimited pots of gold. Howard Shore's soundtrack successfully tied music to ideas. Every important character, country, and place has its own feel, and a large part of that comes down to the music. Saruman, Gondor, Rohan, and, of course, the Shire, all have their own themes which are instantly recognizable. Matching ideas to melodies allowed Howard Shore to change them to signify the changes occurring in those ideas. Most notably, the theme of the Shire becomes darker and less homeful as the trilogy progresses. The feeling of comfort and home timed with the theme is slowly lost as the story advances, and Sam and Frodo become not only physically but emotionally detached from the Shire. After Frodo tells Sam to go home, the theme of the Shire begins to play, but it's unable to find the original melody, as if something has been lost. And something has been lost. At this point, no matter what happens, Sam and especially Frodo will never be whole again. There will always be a small part of themselves they've lost during this journey. Another example is the theme of Rohan. When our main characters first arrive at Edoras, Rohan is a kingdom at the brink of destruction. Saruman's orcs run wild in its territory, and King Theoden is gripped by a spell. The music is initially lost, sad, and melancholic. Even after the victory at Helm's Deep, the full version of Rohan's theme isn't revealed. Only during the Battle of Pelennor Fields, when Rohan rides to the aid of its ally Gondor, does the theme truly take up its glory. Listen to the melody during the Two Towers. And now compare that to the same melody during Return of the King. The evolution of the music represents the change that Rohan has gone through as a nation, defeating Isengard against all odds and riding out to save Minas Tirith and battle the forces of Mordor. What's important here isn't that Rohan has won geopolitically, but that the spirit of the nation has been reborn. It's no longer sad and unsure of itself, but proud and confident, shown in the change of the music. In a story about good and evil, lighting is used very effectively as symbolism for both. For example, right before we encounter Saruman, as Gandalf rides into Isengard, he's overtaken by the shadow of the tower, and Saruman walks out of a low-key lighting environment towards Gandalf, himself entering from a high-key lighting. This instantly tips off to the audience that this isn't someone we should expect to be who Gandalf believes. And as Saruman begins to reveal himself, the lighting becomes more low-key as the dark inside of the tower is explored. Right before the confrontation between the two, Saruman literally shuts out the listened-up pathways Gandalf is walking towards. Another great example is the lighting of the beacons in The Return of the King. During the early stages of The Return of the King, the final movie in the trilogy, we've already been introduced to the main plot point behind the movie, Sauron's attack on Minas Tirith. The film establishes that Rohan's aid will be required to win the battle, but they've already seen that King Theoden may not be so willing to ride to Gondor's aid. Additionally, during Gandalf's talk with Denethor, we've seen that Denethor is a prideful man who is unwilling to see Aragorn return to the throne, and refuses to light the beacons. As a result, Gandalf instructs Pippin to go light the first beacon and set off the chain reaction. The sequence of the chain of beacons being lit begins in the day, continues throughout the night, and ends again in the day. The music swells as the theme of Gondor rings out in its most complete form yet, giving a feeling of hope and inspiration that we haven't yet heard in this movie. During the entire minute dedicated to a scene where the camera is literally just flying over mountains, the camera chases around the light, slowly making its way to Edoras and many of our characters. Literal light is expertly used to convey the passing of good and hope across the mountains to Rohan. Light has so far been treated as hope and almost synonymous with good. In the books, the beacons aren't that important, but in the movies, they are made a central idea because of the visual meaning they're able to give across by using light as a symbolism for good and hope. In another iconic scene shortly after the lighting of the beacons, Faramir and his garrison retreat from Osgiliath on horseback, pursued and harassed by a trio of three Nazgul as they flee the army of orcs and Sauron's storm. Gandalf rides out with Shadowfax, and in a landscape shot we see a lone White Rider riding to challenge the Nazgul. On the right side of the screen, a small, lone white dot moves to the left, while on the left, Faramir's rangers flee the three-winged fellbeasts, pursued by dark clouds and the shadow of Mordor's advance. The music is lost and has the theme of defeat, similar to many of the initial theme scenes in The Two Towers. But as Gandalf casts his beam of light, the music suddenly becomes angelic, invoking feelings of not only peace but hope. In the second wide landscape shot we see, the Nazgul are repelled by Gandalf's beam of light. It's not power or strength that stops them, it's light, which in this world is synonymous with good. Although many other scenes draw upon the idea of light itself being a force of good, this scene is the most explicit about it. Jackson could have easily had Gandalf launch a plume of fire at the Nazgul or draw his sword to fight them, but he instead chose to use a simple beacon of light. Jackson's movies have often been criticized as focusing too much on action. Indeed, Tolkien's son stated that they eviscerated the book by making it an action movie for young people 15 to 25. Although he's not entirely wrong, scenes such as Legolas surfboarding on a shield while no-scoping Uruk-hai definitely wasn't in the books. It's scenes like these that should be focused on, not when he added action when it wasn't needed, but when he chose not to use it to convey a stronger message. Lord of the Rings is filled with details that add to what we see on screen. Not only the lighting, but the set design and environment match the world building and scenario, and Peter Jackson often went to extreme lengths to make something seem believable. For example, the iconic setting of Edoras, Rohan's capital. The site of a lone hill over a large plain is a great way to bring home the idea of the horse-lord nation of Rohan. The flat, expanding terrain is a perfect environment for cavalry warfare, and the broken, rugged environment shows the rural nature of Rohirrim culture. The set was built in environmentally protected land in one of the most desolate places in New Zealand, making it extremely difficult to access, expensive to produce, a legal battle, and a logistical nightmare to make sure everything was put back in its place once the scenes were finished. However, Jackson correctly viewed it as a great spot to place Edoras, and the cost led to a great set piece which showed with a few shots everything the audience needs to know about Rohan. Another example regarding Rohan happened soon after the audience is introduced to Shadowfax. As Gandalf, Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli ride throughout Rohan, the background reveals a burning village, reminding the audience of an earlier scene where we see hillmen sent by Saruman attacking a Rohirrim village. The point of the scene isn't to show the war, but to convey the idea of our characters moving. The village wasn't necessary, but it adds to the idea of the kingdom of Rohan falling apart. The usage of the soundtrack, lighting to represent good and evil, and set designs that match the story all strengthen the feeling of realism of Lord of the Rings. Of the nearly 11 hours of movie, very little of it feels cringy or overdone. The movies will slip you into the world of Middle-earth, an unbelievable world of magic, heroism, and a simple fight between good and evil.